Hi, welcome to this tour of the DAR Museum's collection, Sights and Souvenirs at the World's Fair. So if you're not familiar with what the DAR is, it stands for Daughters of the American Revolution. Its members are all women who can trace their ancestry back to someone who helped the American Revolution. The DAR started the museum as a way to further its goals of historic preservation and education. So the museum collects objects that were in American homes in mostly the 1700s and 1800s. So that's the historic preservation part. And then the education part is what we're doing right now. So our story starts with World's Fairs. The kind we'll be talking about started in London, England in 1851 and were held every few years in several countries from then on. And they're actually still going on today. The purpose of these fairs was to show for both the host and the visiting countries the things that each nation was proud of. So achievements in farming, science, art, and so on. It included some exciting things like moving pictures in 1893 and an air-conditioned building in 1904. So we're going to focus on three of these fairs. The 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, and so that was celebrating 100 years after the United States was founded. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, so that was 400 years after Columbus landed sort of near this continent. Now you'll notice it's actually 401 years. The fair was supposed to be in 1892, but it just took longer than they thought it would to get it all going. And then lastly, the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis, which was 100 years after the Louisiana Purchase. And that was a deal between the United States and France that nearly doubled the size of the United States. So we're going to be taking a look at the DAR Museum's collection that relates to these three World's Fairs. And a note on names. I will try to be consistent and shorten the name to maybe the date or the name of the city it was in, and then the word fair. Because if every time I refer to them I have to say, the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, we're going to be here all day. So the DAR had a booth in the 1893 Chicago Fair in the Women's Building, even though the organization was still new. The DAR was just 3 years old at the time. And this is the Women's Building at the fair shown here under construction, so it's not quite finished yet. The museum also has several objects in its collection relating to these World's Fairs, including the very building that it's in. So here it is. This is the DAR headquarters building. And if you visit Washington, D.C., the building is across the street from, and actually even overlooks, the south lawn of the White House. So to get this picture, you have to be standing on the White House side of the street with your back to the president's backyard. The building's architecture is a style called Beaux-Arts, and that's a French term that means fine arts. So it's a revival architectural style. That means it draws on an older style, in this case classical Greek and Roman architecture, but it kind of reimagines it the way that a modern person, well, modern at the time that it was built, would like that style to look. So this is actually the same style used for these fair buildings, especially the 1893 fair. And so I've got a comparison here. The one on the right, of course, is the DAR building, and then the one on the left is the Palace of Mechanic Arts at the Chicago Fair. And so you can see that several of the elements are very similar. You've got those classical columns, but with a lot more decoration than you saw on the original Greek and Roman structures. I like to describe it as if you took a Greek temple and then decorated it like a wedding cake. That's kind of the Beaux-Arts architectural style. You're also looking at shades of white and cream. I've got an interior shot of the DAR building on the right, and so it's they don't, of course, in the black and white photograph they all look white, but they really were. And one of the nicknames for the Chicago Fair was the White City. The DAR building was completed around 1910, so it is right around the time of these fairs, and that's kind of at the height of this particular architectural style. So the DAR building looks like the buildings of the turn-of-the-century World's Fairs, and so it makes a good place to imagine that you're back in time at one of these World's Fairs. Now, while we're at the fair, we're going to need some help getting around. So let's start looking at the museum objects. And here we are. This is a book, a guide to the Centennial Exposition. So this is a guide to the 1876 fair in Philadelphia. And it contains illustrations and a written guide to the main buildings and areas of the fair. So guides like this were produced for all of the fairs we'll be discussing. They made getting around the fair a little easier, and then they were a nice souvenir to take home afterwards. So now what do we see once we get to the fair? Let's enter the 1904 St. Louis Palace of Liberal Arts to see some of the exhibits in here. Now I'm going to show you some objects in the museum's collection that are the kinds of inventions that excited the turn-of-the-century fairgoers, even though these specific items may not have been exhibited at the fair. But it gives you a good idea of what some of the exhibits were like. So the first one we'll take a look at is this stereoscope. Now, stereoscopes have been around since the mid-1800s, so for about 50 years by the time of these fairs. But they were constantly tinkering with the design, and this particular one, the patent dates to 1904, so it's perfect for this time. Now, many of the photographs I've shown you are actually stereographic views, like this one. So, a stereograph is the picture, the photograph, and then the stereoscope is this. It's the device you use to view the picture. And so here's the idea. So it makes use of your binocular vision. Now you don't see, you have two eyes, and you don't see exactly the same view out of each eye because your eyes are about 2 or 3 inches apart. So what stereographic images do is they take 2 pictures from about 2 or 3 inches apart, the same distance as your eyes. And so look closely at this picture. It looks like it's identical, like they're both the same, but they are not quite. If you look at the 2 edges, the left and the right edge, and I've got this part highlighted so you can tell that one of the pictures is slightly more to the left and the other one is slightly more to the right. So what you do is you view this through a stereoscope, and then each eye is seeing that slightly different image, just like it would in real life. So then your brain puts it together the way it knows how to create a 3-dimensional image. That's the thing. You're able to see this in 3D, even though it's a flat 2D image. Now, there's no way that I can show you the 3D image on your flat screen that you're looking at this. So I hope you have a chance at some point to look through a stereoscope. They made many stereographic views of these turn-of-the-century World's Fairs. And these were souvenirs for those who attended, and then they were also a virtual experience for those who didn't attend. So see, virtual tours have been around for a long time. Here is one from the 1893 Chicago Fair showing the German village. And then here you can see the grand approach to the festival hall from the 1904 St. Louis Fair. Now, while outdoor scenes were more common because there was better lighting, sometimes you do get to see indoor exhibits in these views. So if you have ever wanted to gaze upon a 3-dimensional image of President Theodore Roosevelt made out of butter, well, here is your chance. So the stereoscope had been around for a while by the time of these fairs, but this is an invention that was newer at the time. It's called a zoetrope, and it's a toy from 1882 that uses an early form of animation. So the name zoetrope comes from a combination of Greek words that loosely mean wheel of life, because this spins, the top part of it spins, so it's like a wheel, and then as it's spinning, it makes the images come to life. It works for the same reason that video works. Many still images that you flip through very quickly make the images appear to move. So the very first movie theater was at the Zoepraxographical Hall, not a very catchy name, at the 1893 fair. So this is the first time that you could buy a ticket to see moving pictures projected on a screen. This is the start of videos. The Zoetrope toy had been around for a little while, but you could just view it in your house up close. At the Zoepraxographical Hall, a whole group of people was experiencing the very same video projected onto a screen. So I've got here a quote from a newspaper from the time, one of the people who was viewing these. "A large number of photographs of horses galloping, leaping, etc., by the aid of an astonishing apparatus called a zoopraxiscope. The animals walked, cantered, ambled, galloped, and leaped over hurdles in a perfectly natural and lifelike manner." So that viewer was quite enthusiastic. The 1904 fair included very impressive displays of electric lighting at night. So electricity wasn't very new at this point, but unless you lived in a city where there was an electric grid, likely your house did not have electricity and you used kerosene lamps instead. So it was probably fun for fairgoers who didn't live in a city to experience all that electricity just lighting up all the buildings. Now, I've got a picture of the St. Louis Fair on the left, with the buildings all lit up electrically, and then on the right is an electric chandelier in the DAR building, which was one of the first buildings in DC to be made for electricity right from the start. And so that's exactly the kind of lighting that we're talking about here at the fair. And I've got a close-up so you can see the bulbs. They use a tungsten filament, which was an improvement over the first light bulb's carbon filaments. These are reproduction bulbs. They're not, the originals don't last that long, but they're the same. They're the same kind of bulb that was used at the time. So like many fairgoers, you're probably going to want to take something home to remember your trip. So let's take a look at some of the souvenirs that come from these fairs. This is a medal from the 1904 St. Louis Fair. They gave out thousands of awards at this fair for all the different achievements, things that were being displayed. They gave out gold, silver, and bronze awards. Now, they were all actually made out of bronze, like this was, and they just said on them gold, silver, or bronze. There also were different shapes for the different awards. Now, this one is made to look like the gold awards, but if you look on the image on the left, it's the same medal, it's just the front and the back, the reverse and obverse. So the image on the left there says commemorative medal. So this was not given as an award, this was a souvenir. Another metallic souvenir you could get were spoons. These are silver spoons and they each have a different building on the bowl. So the one on the left, and I've got a little close-up of it so you can see it, shows the 1893 Mines and Mining Building. And then the one on the right shows the 1904 Administration Building. If you'd rather get something a little softer, here's one option for you. This is a coverlet commemorating the 1876 Philadelphia Fair. So the main design on it is a view of Memorial Hall, one of the buildings at that fair. And I've got a photograph of that building for comparison, so you can see how well did the weaver do in replicating that building. Now this was woven on a jacquard loom. So it was mechanized, mass-produced. You know, this is not one person sitting in their home carefully making this. These were mass-produced and sold as souvenirs. Now, if that's too big, because it is a coverlet, it's a whole bed covering, you could get a handkerchief. World's Fair handkerchiefs were saved as mementos. You usually see them in patriotic designs and colors, and then combined with images of the major buildings at the fair. So the one on the left is silk, and it's for the 1876 Philadelphia Fair. It depicts their Centennial Hall Art Gallery. Then the one on the right is cotton. One corner says Louisiana Purchase Centennial Exposition, and then the other three corners show buildings at that fair. The flags in the middle are the U.S. flag on the left, and on the right, they actually made a flag specifically for this fair. So that's the official flag of the Louisiana Purchase Centennial Exposition. Sometimes people kept these handkerchiefs as is, and then sometimes they made them into other things, like this quilt. This is a pieced crazy quilt. It's made out of silks and velvets, very fancy fabrics, with embroidery. There's commemorative ribbons in there, and a piece of a printed scarf from the Chicago Fair. Now, crazy quilts were popular for about 25 years at the end of the 1800s. They were made to be decorative and artistic. They're not warm bed coverings like that coverlet. So this one, for example, just has a front and a back. There's no stuffing or batting on the inside to make it warm. It's just decorative. So quilts like this one were meant to be draped attractively over the sofa in your parlor. So it's the perfect place for a commemorative design like the one from the fair here. So that is a quick walk through some of the sights and souvenirs of the World's Fairs from over 100 years ago. So I hope you'll take a moment to look around your home right now and see if you have any souvenirs from important events in your life or trips that you've taken. And then do a little thinking about what it says about your experience. What did you choose to remember? So you never know, your souvenir might end up in the DAR Museum in another 100 years. Thank you all so much for joining me on this tour. I hope you will check out our website for more events and digital resources. And if you have any questions, you can reach us by email.